What's up? Dev Demolino back here today. I apologize if I sound a little sick today. I am a little sick today, but you know what? I am striking while the iron is hot, and we're going to go ahead and do a review of this new Kendrick Lamar album, Darn. So before I say or critique or analyze anything about this album, I wanted to take a moment to say this. There is nothing that I've come to love more in the culture of hip-hop than the atmosphere that takes place when Kendrick Lamar is about to or has just released an album. And I really enjoy that moment of unification where I realize that I and a wide majority of hip-hop fans all across the world are taking a moment to intently listen to this music that has come out. And with every Kendrick release so far, fans have been treated to a body of work that is worth the amount of attention that they collectively gave it. So with that being said, I don't want to dive too deeply into introducing Kendrick Lamar or the album. I think people who are watching this video probably already know or will find out enough as they watch the review. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start things off with Blood, the very short introduction track. There's no real music here. It's more so Kendrick Lamar recanting a story for the audience. Again, there is a little bit of music going on here underneath the story that he's telling, but I think it's more so to provide the atmosphere that he's alone, he's isolated. Again, this is very spacious, it's all very quiet. He's telling the story about watching this blind woman kind of pace up and down the street, and she looks frustrated as if she is looking for something. He kind of minds his own business for a little bit, and eventually he takes a moment to ask her if he can help her find anything. She takes this moment, she looks back at him, she says, "Oh yes, you have lost something, your life." And there's a gunshot that goes off, and we are left to believe that Kendrick in the first song has been shot and killed. And one of the things that takes place here in the music that I find to be important for the storytelling aspect of this intro is the violins that play quietly and very subdued in the background. As Kendrick tells more and more of the story, the violins play progressively higher and higher notes. It's used very well to build the suspense and engross the listener in this story up until that moment where all of a sudden, boom, he's been shot. And that intro plays very important throughout the rest of the album because us as listeners are left wondering, okay, is Kendrick dead? Is the music that we're hearing supposed to represent his life flashing through his eyes before he dies? Are the personas that are taking place different versions of Kendrick Lamar? What's going on here? And we don't get any answers for that right away. What we get is the next song, DNA. DNA I found to be a fitting start to the album musically. I think paired with Blood, it gives a couple big hints as to the direction that this album is going to take. The production for this song is very heavy. It's very Mike Will made it, definitely a lot of bass. And again, going back to the pairing of Blood and DNA, I think it makes a statement at the very beginning of the album that yes, there is a story that is taking place. There is a reason for you to hone in and listen to my lyrics, but we are going to leave the very avant-garde jazz funk fusion instrumentals in the last album and go with a more straightforward and abrasive sound with this coming project. And again, with DNA, I think he encapsulates that feeling very well. What takes place before the music starts is a clip of a CNN anchor criticizing Kendrick Lamar's lyrics, obviously misunderstanding and being out of touch with the message that he is providing. Even though a very early track, this is definitely one of my favorites that show up amongst the 14. If you have yet to see the music video that has come out for that song, I would pause my video right now. I would go over and check that out. The visuals and the depiction of the story is very cool. And on top of that, there is a very cool, very well-known actor that shows up in the first scene. Right off the bat, you can tell the lyrics of this song definitely serve a couple different purposes. The first being a retort to this media personality and others that think like him as a way to say, look, sex, drugs, money, murder, etc. are all literally in my DNA. This is the way that I am. This is why I rap about what I see. Now, on the other side of things, this is Kendrick's moment to sort of reiterate who he is, where he's from, what precedes him, and sort of frames the story moving forward as we progress through the rest of the album. Element is a really funny song because as much as we love seeing how insightful and prophetic that Kendrick Lamar can be, sometimes it's equally enjoyable to see Kendrick prophesize that he may have to take a faking-ass rapper and smack him upside the head. And
make it look sexy.
And I really like the closing statement on this song in which Kendrick is kind of talking about how on the last LP, you know, he spent his time trying to uplift some more of the black artists, but there being a difference between black artists and whack artists. And like I said, this song is a good example of lyrics in which nothing is being explicitly foretold to the listener as it pertains to the content of the story of this album. But just because you're not being told explicitly that XYZ is happening right now does not mean that the story is not still playing itself out through this section of the music. And I don't want to spoil too much of the deeper meaning of the music for you guys quite yet, but it does seem to me like there are a lot of moments on here in which the lyrics being spoken don't actually tell you quite as much as the way they are being spoken or the overall sentiment of the lyrics. Something that you guys should definitely be paying attention to if you are trying to listen intently is the words and the way that the words are being said. Is Kendrick being wicked or is Kendrick being weak? Because at the very beginning of this album, it's the first thing that's said in the Blood intro is it wickedness? Is it weakness? You decide, are you going to live or are you going to die? So as things are being said and decisions are being made, it really seems like that is the push and pull force that is really controlling the destiny of this story. One of my best examples of this would probably be the songs Humble and Pride, which sit right next to each other somewhere around the middle of this album. Even in their titles, Pride and Humble take on two different sides of a spectrum. The instrumentals themselves also have a very stark contrast between them as well. Pride kind of descends the listener into this very sparse and like haunted instrumental. And again, the song is called Pride, but the lyrics are very introspective and remorseful. And the chorus is covered in these very ghoulish, undead screams, kind of almost as if to represent Kendrick's demons haunting him as he revisits, moments of pridefulness that he's not necessarily proud of. This is actually one of the most theatrical songs on the album because of that, and because of the way these words are spoken. The pitch has been modulated and like kind of oscillates between high and low and high again, to distinctify and highlight certain lyrics amongst others. Fast forward to the next song, Humble. The instrumental is sharp, bombastic. The lyrics are not really humble at all. Because again, moments like this are directly linked with one another, but then contradict themselves by their sound and by their lyrics. One moment Kendrick is wicked and one moment he is weak. What does that say to us? With Humble specifically, the music video is so well done. Even in the context of the rest of the album, when I'm listening to this song, I can still see every single scene of that music video playing out in my head as I'm listening to it. And again, songs like this, DNA, Element kind of provide the banger dynamic that the last album didn't necessarily have, nor did it need. Because on this album, Kendrick even takes it a step further by putting explicitly mainstream songs in the track listing, which I do think go over pretty well and are tastefully done. Loyalty with Rihanna, I think, is actually a really good collision between two pretty major artists here. And I think in a song where you put two people as self-sufficient as Kendrick Lamar and Rihanna on a song, as long as the song is well written, their personalities and their talent kind of just take the track over from there. This track and the song Love definitely have intentional mass appeal to them, and the way that they're positioned on the track listing is intentional and seems to contrast some of the darker, grittier, and more aggressive moments on the album quite well. In a way, I for sure feel like this album is sort of centralized around the idea of contrasting sounds and even contradicting ideas throughout the project. Because in the song XXX or XXX, contradiction plays a major role in the storytelling aspect of this song. Now, this song is the clear winner of being my favorite song on the album. Instrumental-wise, lyrics, the lore of the song, the way the story is told, the sense of contradiction within the lyrics, and again, the contrast between this song and its predecessor, Love. The story kind of breaks down as such. A friend is calling Kendrick Lamar about a tragic situation in which his son has been killed. The specifics of why this child was killed or what the whole issue was about is pretty vague, other than the fact that we can interpret that this situation has to do with drugs or arms dealing, and as Kendrick puts it, his friend had insufficient funds, and that's probably the reason why this child was slain. Now, pretty hysterical, his friend is calling him, basically asking him, what do I even do in this situation? What would you do in this situation? And as Kendrick explains it, he's coming to him because he feels like he is anointed. He's someone that's close to God, someone that is wise beyond his years. Now, time and time again, we have heard Kendrick talk on the subjects of general violence, black-on-black violence, gang violence specifically. And time again from Kendrick, we have heard very thoughtful, very hopeful, very wise remarks from Kendrick, on these subjects. Usually a stance in which the resolution ends with, finding commonality between you and your fellow man and finding love for another human being. But in this song, he flips that sentiment for a very eye for an eye approach. He's basically saying, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is how I feel. If somebody touched my son, my blood, my family, that person is losing a life. And as we get further into the verse on the first half of this song, Kendrick is making it very clear that he would go to extreme lengths to avenge the death of a loved one. Basically saying that he would even go as far as to catching this dude outside of Sunday service, if that was all he had to find him. And then on top of that, once the deed would be done, he doesn't even care about the consequences of those actions. He's literally saying that he would blow this dude away, drop the gun in his lap, prints and everything, and pretty much walk to the police station and turn himself in. And again, this very short-sighted approach to a very controversial issue is not what we are accustomed to hearing from Kendrick Lamar when it comes to topics like these. And this is part of the reason why, again, I'm going back to the idea that, not everything that's being said on this album is supposed to be coming from Kendrick in, the world that we know him to be. Because again, Kendrick would obviously know that the words that come about on this song are really anything but typical coming from him. And so I think the song is purposefully very meta in that the full 180-degree switch of ideals for Kendrick is kind of this clue to the listener that, this isn't the Kendrick that we are previously aware of. Simultaneously, I think Kendrick Lamar is providing a voice for the black-on-black violence that happens in our country, but gets immediately written off as savage and senseless violence. Realistically, people don't really give a shit to get to the bottom of why black-on-black violence has been so prevalent in our country for the past 30 or 40 years. And I think in hip-hop music, we have, two different kinds of rappers when it comes to these kinds of subjects. Now you have the rappers like Kendrick Lamar who are very smart, wise, and want to promote this idea of being harmonious amongst our own kind and amongst people in general. Now on the other hand, you have your 21 Savages, you have your Kodak Blacks, your drill rappers of the world, and what they bring to hip-hop is what they see and what they know. They speak about violence, especially drug and gang-related violence, as a matter of fact of life. And a lot of these rappers even go as far as to, glorify this kind of violence. And I don't even think that all of these rappers are wrong to speak about these topics the way that they do. It's just that they don't necessarily have the wherewithal or specifically the lyrical talent of a Kendrick Lamar to take these subjects and really break them down in a way to make other people outside of the people that already live in this dynamic understand why this dynamic exists. Again, the way that Kendrick speaks about it, there is a reason, there is obviously a sense of passion as to why he feels the way that he does. And so as far as topics that surround songs on this album and the lyrics that find themselves within certain songs on this album, this is by far the most captivating and interesting to me personally, as I was going through this front to back. And all of this is paired with a very noisy, very urgent, very turbulent instrumental. And when I first heard this, it immediately struck me as this very NWA style instrumental. And then, even more interestingly, on the other half of the track, it features none other than the legendary rock band U2. And then all of a sudden, these lyrics start rolling back to a much more big picture and thoughtful and wise, sense of wording. And unlike other moments on this album where the contradictions usually come from one song to the next or from one song to another, the contradiction literally is split right down the middle, in one song. Again, not necessarily breaking the fourth wall, but knocking on it quite loudly and making it very clear that not everything is supposed to be taken at its face value here. As far as songs with powerful lyrics, very interesting and captivating topics, and lyrics worth reading into, much like any other Kendrick Lamar project, Damn has them in spades. Again, Triple X has this extremely heavy topic to it. And before that, it's contrasted by this very blissful message on the song Love. The song Lust really takes turns tackling, different vices from the perspective of a male and a female. The song Feel has lyrics and a flow to it that is so captivating. Kendrick is again proving himself to be an absolute wordsmith on the microphone, making an anaphora of using the word feel. I feel like people are saying this. I feel like people are doing that. I feel like I can't breathe. I feel like I can't sleep. I feel this, that, and the third. And the song Fear is a track in which the structure of the song itself is distinct and interesting. I heard a writer for Hot New Hip Hop describe it as the same kind of structure as the movie Moonlight. Kendrick is reaching back into ages 7, 17, and 27. Now, fast forward to Kendrick being 27 years old, he is already one of the most prominent musicians in the modern era. And I think where the lyrics get interesting here is in the sentiment that fear does not go away once you have made it to this level of success. He kind of explains that at a certain time in your life, fear looks like A, and at that time you think that you need B to overcome that. Finally, one day you get to B and you realize that fear has ended up becoming C now. Duckworth is the one song on this album that has the most straightforward telling of a story. From front to back, all the details are actually in the story and we aren't left to interpret what certain things mean. And again, when you look into the details and read between the lines of the music, this is, again, a really good decision made by Kendrick Lamar. Because everything that makes this story interesting is the weird twist of fate that comes about of how Kendrick's father and his now label manager, Anthony Top Dog Tiffith, came to meet by real complete chance. And the way that Anthony and Kendrick's father come together in this story is in a moment where Top Dog and his people are literally robbing the KFC that Anthony works at. And Kendrick really pinpoints that moment and that interaction as something that really changed the fate of Ducky, Top Dog, and then inherently Kendrick. And he was basically saying that in this moment when Ducky was being held up at this KFC by Top Dog, if Top Dog would have just wasted this dude, Top would not be running the very successful TDE record label that he owns today, in which Kendrick is on. Ducky would have been dead and Kendrick would have grown up without a father, likely becoming another statistic, another stereotype in today's society. And so again, this is another moment in which I really wonder about, on Damn, are there multiple personalities, 2 or more Kendricks, that are showing up here? Because he really hints at the idea that if this string of events had happened in a different manner, that things in his life would be extremely different and he would be a very different person. And again, there are multiple moments on this record where it seems like he is really trying to evoke a different personality or a different persona of Kendrick Lamar. And at the end of the song, we have an outro that is pretty much interchangeable with the intro that took place with The Blind Woman. And in true Kendrick Lamar fashion, the album sort of ends in this perfect loop in which the story can just kind of turn itself over again and again and again. Overall, I think Kendrick has provided fans with another stellar album. I really did find myself in anticipation of this album, really wondering what else Kendrick could do to surprise us. And I won't say that this album has necessarily any moments that completely blew me away the way that To Pimp a Butterfly did, but I also didn't necessarily expect him to kind of return to a bit more commercial and mainstream sound. So in that sense, I commend him because I think people were beginning to feel like his solo efforts were going to continue to get further and further away from, radio play. I think the overarching lore here is definitely interesting. It is a little less gratifying than both To Pimp a Butterfly and Good Kid, Mad City. There are a lot of variables in place on this record that are left unchecked or more so left up to the interpretation of the listener. I feel like this dynamic is well represented in the song Lust, where there are just a few different topics going on here and we're not entirely sure where to pinpoint a central sentiment of the song. Same thing with the entire album. There are a lot of different topics covered here, a lot of different feelings covered here, which I think all of them are very good. It's just we don't know exactly where they all are centrally unified quite yet. And, maybe with time we will. Again, overall, I love this album, but this album definitively solidifies this statement for me. Kendrick Lamar is the best rapper alive. Absolutely no question. You just don't have another rapper out there that can do all of what Kendrick can do in one project alone, one song alone. But in describing this album alone, I find it to be very existential in the way that he questions himself, his existence, society, and he leaves a lot of space for himself and his listeners to wonder about who or what he would be, if certain events had happened in different ways. I also find this album to be prevailing in the sense that Kendrick sort of goes back to the future from, his previous old funk fusion sound, now with a much more current sound that can really make its splash, its effect on mainstream media. And again, this album is also extremely temperamental. At one moment, Kendrick is saying and feeling one thing to evoke one kind of emotion, one kind of persona, and then on the next song, or even in that song itself, he is doing, saying, feeling something entirely different, all to create these different and parallel universes or different Kendrick Lamars, all of which I find extremely interesting, and they're all worth looking into individually. And that's it. That's what I got for you guys on this review of this album. Damn, I loved looking into this album analytically, and I'm excited to share this review with you guys. Of course, as always, I would love to see what you guys thought of this album. It seems like a lot of you really liked it. Some people felt strongly otherwise, which I find to be interesting. And more specifically, I would like to know favorite tracks, 1, and 2, where do you rank this album amongst the rest of Kendrick's discography? Specifically his albums, and then, we could even add his mixtapes into the fold as well if we want. But that's definitely a discussion I want to have down in the comments section. Once again, I would like to thank you guys for always rocking with me on these reviews. There are more to come for sure, and more reviews of a different variety as well is something that I'm working on. So stay tuned with me. Subscribe if you can. You can follow me at Twitter at DevDelMolino. You can follow me on Instagram at 40 ounces of Dev or Devonye West, and a few other social media sites as well. Other than that, you guys will just have to catch me on the next review, the next video, the next whatever the hell I do, and I will see you there, okay? Thanks a lot. Peace.